Guys, I'm super excited to share with you a new feature that Microsoft has put into the PowerFX language within our Canvas Power Apps. Now, before I can tell you about this new feature, which is actually user-defined types, I want to go back and talk about the things that Microsoft has given us that has led up to this point, and how important and how significant this new feature is. So I've written this article out here on powerplatformlinks.com, and I've laid out everything that I wanted to cover in this video, starting with App Formulas. Seems like Microsoft wants us to get away from using App OnStart and move things over to App Formulas and perhaps even a loading screen. There's already options within PowerApps settings to turn off App OnStart. Now, what has App Formulas given us? What are we able to do now with App Formulas that we weren't able to do in the past? Since they've given us App Formulas, we've been able to create name formulas, which is a way to define constants. What are constants? Well, as opposed to variables. Variables change, and constants aren't supposed to change. But there are many that are calling named formulas a way to declare constants. And that's not too bad of a description. You can actually do quite a bit more with name formulas than just define something that doesn't change. So I'd like to point that out. Probably the biggest limitation of App Formulas, and I talk about this quite a bit, it is for declarative only code. Now, what's declarative code as opposed to imperative code? Well, this is actually very easy to describe because you all are probably very familiar with working with controls. Let's say, for example, a button. I don't care if it's a modern button or a classic button, but any control has got tons of properties that you can change, and they're all declarative type of properties, with the exception of properties that start with the prefix on. So you've got a button on select, you've got a timer on timer end, on timer start. Even a screen has got on visible. Now, we were just talking about App OnStart, which we could have imperative code there. So this is a little bit of a change up if you're trying to move from App OnStart over to App Formulas, because you simply just can't copy and paste or cut and paste all your code from App OnStart to App Formulas, because the only code that you could put in App Formulas is declarative type of code. Now, first you might think, okay, well, this is a problem. If I'm not supposed to put it in App OnStart, and I'm supposed to put it over in Formulas, App Formulas, and I can't put it there, then what's going on? Now, what I've done over here in PowerApps is I brought up a very old version of my Jumpstart kit because I used to have a lot of things in App OnStart. And one of the first things that I have here is a global variable called original developer, and it's got my email address here. And I can show or hide things, enable or disable things if the person using the app is a developer or a developer that has worked inside this code where they can put their email address here. So the set function is actually an imperative function. That means we can't use it in App Formulas. Now, if I were to take this and go over to App Formulas, and I'm going to paste that code here. Now, I just told you that we cannot use imperative code like set in App Formulas. So how would we do this? I name everything that I put in App Formulas prefixed with FX. And I might say original developer, and perhaps I should put email in there. So this is what's going to be called a named formula. That is the name of my formula that will return or be evaluated down to an email address that I want. So I'll just copy my email address here, and there we go. Now I don't need this anymore. So what I could do, copy the name of this, I'll copy the name of this, can go over to the global search and replace. Every place where I've got this global variable, I can put in the name of our name formula. So this is a way where you can start migrating things from the App OnStart over to App Formulas. Let me give you another example. So we were just talking about declarative versus imperative. And I told you that you're probably very familiar with imperative and declarative, just dealing with controls. Now, what about the functions? Now, I just told you that this set function is an imperative function, which means we can't use it in App.Formulas. Now, I do have a function list over here that I've created where I mark each of these functions either as declarative or imperative. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a function that you probably use a lot in App OnStart. And look at this, clear collect. We have collect, clear. And this right column here is for imperative type of functions. Now, many of us define collections in our App OnStart, and we can see here that collect, and clear are imperative, which means we can't use them in App.Formulas. So how are we going to deal with that? Well, I'll show you. Now, I'm going to go over to the Data tab here within PowerApps Studio, and I'm going to add in one or two SharePoint lists that I have prepared. So I'm going to pull in App User and also Address. All right, so now I'm going to go over to App OnStart, and I'm going to go to the very top and show you something that you've probably either seen a lot or have put into your own applications, which would be clear collect COL users. And then we could give it the name of our SharePoint list, app user. Something that you'll notice with imperative code is that you're going to have a semicolon at the end, and that is to separate lines of code out. Now consider this. If you go over to App Start Screen, the Start Screen is actually a declarative type of property. Notice that there's no semicolon at the end. There's only one line of code. Now this actually probably looks like 15 lines of code, right? Now I'm not counting the comments. When I say one line of code, if I remove all the formatting, it really would or could appear on one line of code. All right, I'll hit Format Text. Now, I could have all kinds of nested functions in here, declarative type of functions, and have all kinds of logic. And as you can see here, if is a declarative type of function. There could be all kinds of complexity in here, but it all evaluates down to a single value, the start screen, a reference to a screen that your application should use as the start screen. I'm going to go back over here to App OnStart. Now, since we can't use clear collect in App.Formulas because it is imperative, how would we use it in App.Formulas? It's not that difficult. I'm going to go down here and paste the code that I have. And instead of creating a collection, COL users, I would say something along the lines of FX app users. App user. There we go. It's even shorter, simpler code. I like it. I'm going to say this several times because it trips a lot of people up, and I don't want you to trip on this concept here of imperative and declarative. Now, something I said a few moments ago is when you have imperative code, you can separate lines of code with semicolons. Now, this is the first exception to this rule working with App.Formulas because you're declaring declarative expressions, formulas, and there needs to be some way of separating them out. So a semicolon makes sense. But everywhere else, if you have semicolons, typically you're working with imperative code. Now, something you guys probably already know is that in the case of an imperative code block, like a screen on visible, we could use an imperative function like notify. If this is the only line of code, you don't have to put a semicolon there. So I just want to be crystal clear in all these terms and these rules that I'm sort of pointing out that are inside of PowerFX. But if I had another line of code like patch, which is also an imperative function, we would have to have that semicolon there. But the very last imperative line of code, you don't have to have the semicolon there. All right, so what else can we do with App.Formulas?